Welcome to the Healthcare Technology Report, a leading information source on healthcare technology companies and solutions. In this episode, we speak with Adam Mendelsohn, co-founder and CEO of Vivani Medical, a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company developing miniature long-term subdermal drug implants to improve treatment outcomes for chronic diseases. Using its proprietary NanoPortal technology, Vivani's lead programs include NPM 115 for chronic weight management, NPM 139 for obesity, and NPM 119 for type 2 diabetes, each designed to maintain consistent medication levels for 6 months or longer and address the issue of medication non-adherence. Before leading Vivani, Mendelsohn co-founded Nano Precision Medical, which merged with Second Sight Medical Products in 2022 to form Vivani. He also serves on the board of the Maestro Foundation. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow. Adam, great to see you. Thanks for joining.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Physics and music. That's what you majored in. Very curious. I have a music background myself, but what was your instrument?
So piano performance was the double major that I had with physics. I also play violin. I started piano when I was 5 years old. I picked up violin when I was 8. Was a little bit more serious with the piano. I did my first year at UCLA as a physics major, and then I was continuing to take piano lessons. So I sought to figure out if there was a way that I could add the music major on top of that, which I did starting in my sophomore year, and ended up graduating, with a piano performance and a physics major. I played piano at my physics graduation because it happened to be at the music department at UCLA. And I played violin once in an advanced mechanics course when we were studying how strings of different frequencies make sounds. There were a couple of ways when those two hobbies merged. Anyways, it was very rich background, and obviously I've focused on the sciences going forward, but I still do play music when I have a chance.
Wonderful. And people commonly think that there is a tie, in terms of people who are good at music and music theory tend to be good at math as well, but you're exercising different facets to your brain almost on a daily basis as you switch from one thing to the other. Did you find in kind of certain ways that music helped influence your ability to maybe think creatively?
I do recall hearing that there is this relationship between, particularly at a young age, people that study things or work on things that help make the connection between the right brain and the left brain stronger. And there are plenty of examples of really extraordinary scientists who also played an instrument. And I do think that there probably is some connection. It's unclear to me whether, let's say, someone's abilities or talents that lend themselves towards both end up resulting in someone who is a scientist also playing music, or whether there is a causative relationship, actually working on an instrument or studying music, helping facilitate someone's scientific abilities. I don't know that that has ever been definitively answered, but and I think that historically music was taught as, in a way, a form of mathematics. And there is a lot of math that goes into how music is composed and how music is conceived. So definitely some connections there. And, at the very least, it makes for, I think, a more rich experience with life.
Absolutely. And I can touch on someone else I interviewed recently who's very much into the arts. And this is someone deep into AI. But switching gears, implants. I find it fascinating as a solution to non-adherence. I have someone in my family that has to take a pill every single morning. And if they were to forget for an extended period of time, it would have very negative implications. The idea, obviously, when you see an implant like yours is that, can you apply this to everything? Can you use that implant technology? And so I was trying to discern, is Vivani Medical focused on both the drug as well as the implant, or is it more the implant technology and the way it dispenses on a consistent and standardized basis?
So we started the company thinking about the technology as a platform. How can we facilitate addressing the non-adherence challenge across a wide range of chronic diseases with an implantable drug delivery technology that can allow for sustained steady state release of medicine? As we were working at how we would demonstrate value and how we would position our company for success, what we learned is that no one else knew how to develop a formulation of a particular drug that would work with our technology, both in terms of some technical aspects like the stability of the drug, or in terms of how it interacts with how the technology releases the drug. And we ended up layering on capabilities within our company to not only develop the technology to deliver the drug, but how can we develop formulations that enable existing drugs to work with our technology? And one thing led to another, and we ended up having the capability to develop a full product that incorporated the technology. And when the GLP-1 class emerged, it became what we saw as the kind of killer app, right? The stars really aligned for why this particular class of drug would benefit tremendously from our technology. And so we started to focus our company around not so much the platform, but more about how do we develop a product that utilizes our platform in the GLP-1 space. Now, we still intend to leverage the platform as widely as we can, but for the last number of years, we've been primarily focused on developing an asset, developing a product that incorporates our technology. And along the way, we are producing information that we think will help facilitate partnerships when it comes to how are we going to manufacture this technology, what nuances in terms of how the technology interacts with different types of drug molecules can enable us to more efficiently apply it to new drugs, and even some clinical data in humans demonstrating that it's safe, that it can be well tolerated, that the procedures are fine. All of that we think will be leverageable as we then look to apply this more broadly as we go forward. But at the moment, we are 90% of the company focused on developing a new drug device combination product, implant for the GLP-1 class, without losing sight of how more broadly this could be applied across, a wide range of diseases.
So when in the future a patient desires to take one of your implants, it's the full product, and the kind of arrangement with the pharma company would happen on the back end between you and that pharma company.
Yeah, so the product is already filled with the drug at the time that it's manufactured.
Mm-hmm.
And that combination will have to undergo a sufficient clinical evaluation. With drugs that already have been incorporated in products that have FDA approval, we expect to leverage some of the data associated with those reference products, but still generating additional data so that collectively we have sufficient safety and efficacy information to go to the FDA. But to the extent the drug is proprietary to another drug company, then that would need to be done in partnership or collaboration. To the extent the drug is otherwise generic, then we could do it on our own. Although as we get closer to commercialization, having a commercial capability in these indications is something that our default strategy would be to seek a partner for, although we wouldn't need it in the development of the product per se. And then lastly, the concept of us developing our own drugs that work with our technology is something that one can imagine as well. But the user is going to see a full product that comprises our implant with a drug formulation inside of it that has gone through its own independent testing with sufficient data generated by us, in addition to any data that may already exist with that drug substance in another drug product form. And it will be marketed as a new drug. It'll be regulated as a new drug as well. So it gets a little bit complicated, but we think that this approach can really address some of the major challenges that face not just people not ultimately obtaining the outcomes that they could if only they regularly received the medicine that they were prescribed, but also help lower the costs of healthcare because when people don't take their medicine, they end up having complications that could have been avoided, which can be costly. So it really is a win-win for all of the stakeholders. Oftentimes, there are caregivers who want the assurance that the patient they're caring for is getting their medicine.
Hmm.
But even the physician wants to know that the patient they prescribed the medicine for is getting it. And there is this kind of bonus, which is it would be a billable procedure for the physician to be able to offer it. So it really is kind of a win-win all around. And we're just excited to be on the journey.
And these things take time, as we all know, especially in this space. I mean, with the regulatory approvals and, all the different steps, what's the timeline look like?
So we haven't given public guidance on the overall timeline to having an approved product. But what I can say is, we are in early clinical development, and the overall approach with our lead programs is to leverage data that exists with these same compounds because they are in approved products already. There's a pathway called a 505(b)(2) pathway where we generate our own data and we reference data that exists with the products that incorporate the drug substance. And we expect that that will allow us to avoid having to conduct the lengthier and more costly phase 3 trials that new chemical entities typically have to go through. So the time frame for a 505(b)(2) pathway is much shorter. And so again, since we haven't given guidance on the overall timeline, I don't want to say anything specific, but we expect it to be a relatively abbreviated program, but still a number of years until we get something that's on the market. And everything is moving forward pretty well. And we're excited, although we are still kind of early in clinical development at the moment.
Is this implant or some kind of variation of it, does it already exist in the market, or is this completely new that when you actually put this, it ends up being commercialized, it's going to be the only one out there?
So there are other drug implants that exist, but all of them utilize fundamentally different technology.
Hmm.
Probably the example that's the closest as far as the size of the implant that's subdermally placed is a contraception implant called Nexplanon. This provides several years actually of contraception relief. But it's what we find to be intriguing is that in spite of competing in a largely generic, relatively inexpensive space with easy to use daily oral medication, that product generated nearly $1 billion of revenue last year. About 10% of women who are on contraception of any kind are on a long-acting reversible option like the implant or the IUD, and it's about half-half between those two. And it's routinely administered in a primary office visit, readily trainable procedures for everyone that is generally available to do those insertions and removal. So that's a great analog for us. There are other much larger implants that go into the peritoneal cavity that have catheters to deliver medicine in different places that are much more complicated. And that's not an exhaustive list. But the one thing I can say is that our implant technology, which is a nanopore membrane that passively controls the release of medicine from the reservoir, will be the first of that particular approach. And that is why, we were so pleased to see that in our first human trial, which happened earlier this year, that everything went well. It was the first time that this type of technology had been evaluated in a human subject. We've done plenty of preclinical work in animal models, but our technology enables the drugs like the GLP-1 agonists, which are peptides, to be delivered from a subdermal implant in a way that has very smooth release. And that is what differentiates it from the other technologies that have been used for implantable drug delivery that are small enough in form to potentially be suitable for our application. As an example, the contraception implant technology, it's an ethylene vinyl acetate copolymer. It has been successfully applied to small molecules, the hydrophobic small molecules, but peptides are larger, hydrophilic, and we haven't seen successful commercial application of that particular technology to this class of compound before. And there have been other attempts to develop implants with peptides that have not succeeded because of complications with the device performance as a result of moving parts and other complications and or manufacturing challenges. So we do think that we, with our new technology, have a path to realize the potential of implants for peptides for which smooth delivery would be beneficial in a way that no other technology has successfully been able to do.
So if I'm understanding, you would be the first to have a GLP-1 implant?
That's right. Right now, we are, at the moment, the only company actively developing a GLP-1 implant. There are probably 100 new drugs, either orals or injectables, that are in clinical development. Some of the orals that are likely to get approved, Eli Lilly has a drug that looks promising for near-term approval. So does Novo Nordisk's oral Wegovy. But there is so much development happening right now in this space because of how large the market is and where the growth opportunities are, and because there are still some challenges with the existing offerings. But no one else is developing an implant but us. And what an implant can provide is not only very infrequent administration, once or twice yearly, whereas the current development approach, there are once monthlies that are in development. Some are looking at even longer than that. But the difference is even if an injectable could be made to be longer than a month, then there isn't a way to stop the treatment if, for whatever reason, that became necessary. As an example, if a woman begins GLP-1 therapy and becomes pregnant, right now the recommendation is to not be on GLP-1s during pregnancy. There are a number of other conditions which can develop, and the peace of mind with an implant that if for whatever reason you needed or wanted to stop the treatment, that you could by removing the implant, and otherwise if everything is going well, you don't have to think about taking any sort of, pill or injection on a frequent basis. That combination really isn't something that anyone else is addressing. And we believe that the demonstration that, as an example, Nexplanon, the contraception implant, has shown, it reveals an interest and a willingness for a meaningful segment of the population to undergo a very simple primary care office procedure that would be required for an implant, whereas, the pills and injections might not need that. But overall, we think that this allows us to justify a meaningful segment of a massive market that no one else is really addressing. That right now, we think we're the only ones. And when I mentioned the only company actively developing implants, there have been others. And there is one particular example that took a product all the way through phase 3 development and did not get approval due to complications of the device as far as what the FDA has said publicly. And I think there have been others at times in the past have discussed actively developing. But as of right now, we believe we're the furthest ahead, and we don't know of anyone else that is actively developing a GLP-1 implant. So we're just excited to be where we are at this moment in time and excited to continue to make our progress.
Curious, where does it get inserted? How quickly does it take?
So for the product we used in our first in-human study, we put it in the outer upper arm in the same location where the commercial implantable glucose sensor called Eversense is placed. So we were able to leverage some of the experience around that. But we have not settled on what the commercial implant site is going to be. We do intend to explore potentially different options. The inner upper arm is where Nexplanon is placed. Other companies have used the abdomen, and it may depend in part on what the size of the implant ends up being, which will be determined ultimately by the dose that will be required. We were planning both a phase 1 and a phase 2 study with our semaglutide implant, which is currently our lead program. The phase 2 study will be a dose ranging study, and we intend to optimize the size of the implant to make it as small as possible for a given dose. Until we have the results of that study, we won't know the size of the commercial implant, but that may ultimately determine, implant location. And we will also intend to seek more feedback from potential users to understand preferences before we make that sort of final decision. And maybe we'll give people an option. If someone wants it in one location or another, that could be on the table as well.
We're entering the tail end of the conversation. I have two final questions, but before I ask those, I'm curious about the formation of the company, how it came to be. It seems like there may have been some mergers and acquisitions of combining some entities, but how did you get involved? I believe you've been there for slightly over 3 years. So would love to understand the history and the evolution.
So my involvement precedes the reverse merger that happened about 3 years ago. I'm one of the co-founders of the company that went through that merger called Nano Precision Medical, which we actually started operating back in 2011 out of a PhD bioengineering program at UC San Francisco and UC Berkeley, having won or placed in multiple, domestic and international business plan competitions during the PhD program. And we started out in what was called a garage in the basement of the bioengineering building on UC Berkeley campus, run by an organization called QB3. And over many years, developed the technology really in a research phase until getting to the point where things were starting to work pretty well. And then we started to grow the leadership of the company. And now we have really tremendous, experienced, successful leaders around me that have done this a number of times. And 3 years ago, we went through a reverse merger that took us public with a company called Second Sight Medical Products. And we rebranded the combined company, Vivani Medical. And we're primarily focused on the drug implant technology that Nano Precision Medical was founded on. But we are still trying to find a path forward for the assets and technology from Second Sight Medical Products. We've created a new subsidiary called Cortigent that we're actually right now in the process of trying to spin off from Vivani now that we've coalesced the strategy around not just the same application they were pursuing, but another application, some additional members of the team, and a more fleshed out development plan. Right now, the government shutdown and the SEC not being open has put a bit of a pause on that because we need them to be able to make registration statements effective. But as soon as the SEC reopens, we look to continue that. And once that spinoff is complete, then Vivani will be a pure play drug implant technology that really is a continuation of what Nano Precision Medical had been. So I've been involved for a long time with this and now have experience with, public company aspects in addition to all of the other challenges of starting a company from scratch and growing it to where we've become, but it's been quite a journey.
Last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
The person who comes most to mind is a legendary medical device entrepreneur named Al Mann, or Alfred E. Mann. He was the founder of many very successful medical device companies, including some for whom I worked. MiniMed, which was acquired by Medtronic. MiniMed made insulin pumps, glucose sensors. Advanced Bionics, which made cochlear implants to restore hearing to deaf people, was acquired by Boston Scientific. Again, this was 20 years ago now, but I worked as an engineer at some of these companies. My father had a close relationship with Al and actually helped organize some of the early private financing rounds for some of those companies that I mentioned. And I had the opportunity to get to know him. He became a billionaire, medical device entrepreneur. He's passed away 10 to 15 years ago now, but he was inspirational as far as his work ethic, how innovative he was, how capable he was. And I definitely aspire, at least on the professional side, at least to accomplish a fraction of what he accomplished, trying to help humankind with their ailments using technologies. And yeah, he probably is one of the most inspirational people for me who I had the opportunity to know somewhat as well. And I'm grateful for having had that.
Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
So I am involved with a nonprofit organization that my father founded around music, which bridges that connection there. It's called the Maestro Foundation. And it originally was created to help young and upcoming musicians have an opportunity to focus on preparing for competitions. And actually, my first piano teacher inspired the creation of it. My parents had their friends pay pay to attend a concert of his so that he could have enough income to focus on preparing for a competition. And that's how it got started. It's been almost 30 years now since that happened. And now it's the main charitable effort it does is actually lends instruments and bows to student musicians that are being held back by the instrument that they have. They cannot afford to obtain one that would potentialize them, and they would otherwise likely become a professional musician. As an example, let's say the top violin professor at Juilliard is choosing to teach a high school student on scholarship, and that teacher says, this person needs a better instrument. Well, the Maestro Foundation does have a library of instruments and bows that they can lend people. I am on the board of the Maestro Foundation, and that is one particular cause that I happen to be involved with and passionate about. It's certainly not exhaustive of all of the causes that I care about, in the world. Obviously, there are others that affect a larger number of people, but this is something where, I think we can be helpful and useful. And we think music is a wonderful thing that we want to share, and we want people to be potentialized as much as possible.
Wonderful. By the way, any relation to the composer Mendelsohn?
No, not that we know of. I mean, he did spell his last name with 2 S's instead of the single S that we have. I mean, that would be fantastic. I'm a big fan of what he composed, but no, my ancestors came from Lithuania, Russia, Ukraine, primarily.
Mm-hmm.
Great grandparents, all of my grandparents were born in the US. Felix, probably not, unfortunately.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a great conversation.
I agree. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.